Language learners often think that old style, old school grammar study equals input. But that's a problem. I'm Joseph Poulshock, PhD, aka Dr. Shock. My PhD is from the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. Remember, because Scotland is great. And I've got over 25 years teaching experience at the university level in Japan, teaching English learners how to learn English and teaching English. I've also spent 10 years or more teaching English teachers how to teach English. I am a professor in the School of International Communication at Senshu University, and I've published books, chapters, and articles, and I'm also a ukulele player. So you can see here my single Ankohala Green. Go ahead and check it out on Spotify, Apple Music, iTunes, YouTube, and Amazon Music. And this video here is separate from my work at Senshu University. So let's get started. What kind of input supercharges language learning, right? Let's think about that. See, because learners often confuse or can easily confuse input with grammar study, memorization, and test prep. But for expert linguists like Stephen Krashen and Paul Nation, real input is not language-focused study and drills. It's not language study per se. It's something else, right? It's not the drill sergeant saying, repeat after me, this is a pen, this is a pen. That's not real input. So I can soften this a little bit and say we can see grammar study and word study and test prep as a kind of weaker input. So why would grammar study, word study, and test prep be a weaker kind of input? Well, the key point is that it fails to focus on meaning. Thank you, Bob Dylan, for repeating that. It fails to focus on meaning. We want to focus on meaning. And oftentimes, grammar study and test prep isn't really meaningful. It's not focusing on messages. So remember, grammar study is good. Test prep study can be good. Vocabulary study is good. But humans naturally acquire language via communication, right? Communication is the key. So we need to work with input, meaningful input, and meaningful output in the form of powerful messages. We need to work with meaningful input and meaningful output in the form of powerful, interesting, enjoyable, important, purposeful messages. Meaning is key. Now, learners say that they want to speak. They often say, I only want to practice output. Output is the main thing. But here's a problem with that. You need meaningful input to get output. You need to get meaningful input to get output. So input kind of comes first, doesn't it? Right? So what does meaningful input give us? Well, for one, input gives us language bits. And by that I mean grammar, right? Grammar points. So when we read a message or listen to a story, we're listening to grammar, right? There's word endings, morphology, right? So how words work together. So we get bits of language, and so we learn English through natural input, through messages and stories, incidentally, right? Indirectly. So as a byproduct of listening to real, interesting, helpful stories, input, and things like that. And we also get that practice with language bits when we produce output as well, right? So, but in addition to the fact that you get language, grammar, vocabulary from just reading stories, enjoying stories, watching dramas, you also get ideas to talk about. So when you read an interesting story that you really liked, you can be impressed by it and then want to talk about it with others. So when you get real input, interesting input, you also get ideas to talk about for output as well. So we need both rich, powerful, meaningful input so we can produce powerful output. We need rich, powerful, meaningful input so we can also produce this powerful output. Now, Paul Nation, in his 4 strands, he recommends that we spend 25% of our time receiving meaningful, interesting, purposeful, storyful messages, and also 25% of our time on sending them. In another video, I will talk about the 4 strands, about how to balance your language learning, but you can see that 50% of our time needs to be spent on understanding interesting messages and communicating messages as well, balancing input and output. So what should we do? What is our call to action? Well, here are 3 simple action steps. Step number 1, spend lots of time with both meaningful input and output. Lots of time understanding stories, messages, dramas, anything that you can understand is good, and then talk about those things with your friends. Spend lots of time with both meaningful input and output. Step number 2, enjoy stories as the best kind of input. Stories work as the most powerful way to put language in your brain. So read and listen to stories at your level. Little plug for my website. You can do that at ReadOasis.com, which has stories in 10 separate levels. And number 3, be bold. Communicate. You'll get feedback and input in return. So don't be shy. Communicate with people. As you make mistakes, you'll get feedback. People say, "What did you mean?" And you'll adjust your message and get input and feedback in return. So those are 3 simple action steps that you can take to use real meaningful input. So here's the key point, the takeaway, the one thing that I want you all to remember. Get real, meaningful, interesting, enjoyable, storyful input to supercharge your language learning. I'm Joseph Poulshock, aka Dr. Shock. I am an expert language coach at languagesuperpowers.com and a content creator at ReadOasis.com. Thank you for listening.